The way this video started out in the planning stages seemed inappropriate in terms of time. After I had finished up my Legacy of Time history series, I thought about doing one for Buried in Time as well. The reason this fell by the wayside was because I had already finished my LP of Buried in Time ages ago, and returning to the game to dig into the history it glances at did not feel like a great use of my time at that point. Sure, there are tons of topics throughout Buried in Time, such as the Mayan afterlife, Da Vinci's flying machines, maybe even briefly discussing the Crusades, but how I did the Legacy of Time series fit well into the overall project, and would not have the same effect with two projects years apart from each other. However, this does not stop me from always thinking about it, and bringing something to life, and in May of 2016, I had the opportunity to get together what may be the only video I ever do for this. Disclaimer right now, I am not an expert in making these kinds of videos, so forgive video quality and anything else you might see. Instead of simply talking about history, let's look at it together. Welcome to Chichen Itza. In May of 2016, I had the opportunity to travel to Cancun for a well-deserved vacation with some of my family. I had just completed the first half of my grad program, and it was time to get away.
The other one must be a tree somewhere.
The place we went away to was fairly decent overall, with great food and services from some of our waiters, great scenery, okay accommodations, but most memorable for me was the performances. Certain restaurants had nightly performances, and for me, they were very captivating. Some commanded attention before you even entered the building. Let's just say it was a great time. Some things we went to within the resort we needed to book, and there were a lot of other places we could go to outside of our resort that we could also book, which included a full-day excursion to Chichen Itza. Now, I've come to understand that depending on who you book with, your trip will be different depending on who you go with, because our trip was not a straight shot to Chichen Itza and back. There were a couple of stops on the way, and we learned a little about the Mayan culture, a little bit of language, which I have honestly forgotten at this point, and the opportunity to buy various things, whether on the bus or at one of the trading posts we stopped at, which had some peacocks just roaming around like nobody's business.
The next day, in this water, hay un karma. There's a karma.
But it was here that our trip to Chichen Itza really began, before we even got there. A notable question that surrounds the civilization of Chichen Itza is how it was able to sustain life. Most civilizations were established by large bodies of water, big example being the Mediterranean Sea. But Chichen Itza is well away from any large bodies of water and roughly 120 kilometers away from Merida, the capital of the Yucatan state. Chichen Itza was able to maintain itself through the use of cenotes, natural sinkholes that collect water. Chichen Itza is thought by many to mean the mouth of the well of the Itzas, but is also interpreted as mouth of the well of the dew, because it is covered with dew 365 days of the year. The well refers to the cenotes. At our stop, we were able to actually go down into the cenote there and even take a swim, which was actually a pretty great time. Cenotes vary in size, and this large limestone cave was also active with other creatures, including bats and birds who accidentally flew through the opening in the cenote. It was after this stop that we finally made our way to the site. There was something I was not expecting when we arrived, and that was the commercialism that bombarded most of the areas of the site. Outside, within the main building gates, and even the archaeological site itself, were inundated with merchants and vendors of all kinds, selling very similar merchandise. This included predators, of all things. But, wow. Predators!
Am I in the way?
You're okay.
Okay.
We were given a warning about purchasing wares, though, as you can't trust the craftsmanship and that good wood and other materials were used. There is a fantastic story about the trees in the region, the Chichen and the Chaka trees, involving warrior princesses, but to keep this short, the Chichen tree is a poisonous tree, and the Chaka tree has a nectar that can neutralize the poison of the Chichen tree, and are found actually growing near each other as a result. All in all, to keep it short, purchase at your own risk. Now, it is unfortunate to say that I did not have the opportunity to visit all of the site, as we arrived later in the day, so most of the outlying temples and landmarks are something I would love to return to at a later date if I can. And since I was previously on the topic of cenotes, let's talk about the big one at the site, the sacred cenote. It's a 200-foot diameter cenote that, according to ethnohistoric sources, was a place of pilgrimage for ancient Maya people who would conduct sacrifices. This information was backed up by a number of human remains that were found, as well as other artifacts that had been found, and presumed to have suffered, quote, intentional damage. It has been speculated that intentionally damaging an item was thought to be, quote, killing the object to be used as a sacrifice. There were many objects, including those made from gold, jadeite, copal, which is a type of resin, different kinds of pottery, flint, obsidian, shell, wood, rubber, and cloth. The sacred cenote is suggested to have its name because Mayan religious officiants believed that only certain cenotes led to the underworld, and sacrifices placed in others would serve no purpose. Therefore, some cenotes were used for solely domestic purposes. Now, archaeological work has been done in Chichen Itza for over a century, and most of the major findings in the sacred cenote are attributed to one man, Edward Herbert Thompson, who is a name that still carries grudges in present-day people today. A little background about him: he was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, and devoted much of his career to studying the Maya civilization. This devotion included living closely with the Mayan local people, learning Spanish and the Yucatec Maya language, as well as their traditions and religion. In 1885, he was appointed vice consul to the Yucatan, and in 1894, Thompson purchased the ruins of Chichen Itza using money from Chicago patron Allison Armour. For 30, almost 40 years, he explored the site, excavating the overgrown temples, and establishing his headquarters at Hacienda Chichen, or the Chichen Estate. It was in 1904 that Thompson prepared for what some called an audacious project, and that was to dredge the sacred cenote. Exploring the sacred cenote is difficult. It is 80 feet below ground level and surrounded by steep cliffs. There was no way to reach the water's surface, and if one made it there, no way to navigate its depths really efficiently. He imported a sturdy crane that supported a cable with a large dredging bucket. Thompson did not see results instantly, as mostly mud and rocks came up for the longest time, but soon Thompson brought up shards of palm resin that, according to ancient legend, were burned to send prayers up to the Maya gods. It was soon after that objects actually started coming up with the crane, which also included the skeletons. However, this wasn't good enough for Thompson, as he then went out of his way to learn how to dive, and went into the sacred cenote himself. The reason? From his book People of the Serpent, he said he knew there had to be small items, probably made of gold or jade, that were slipping through the teeth of the dredge. Despite danger, he was determined to find more artifacts. And he successfully did, despite zero visibility and navigating only by touch on the bottom of the cenote. He concluded his explorations of the sacred cenote in 1910. But where did all of the artifacts that he found go? Well, artifacts recovered from Chichen Itza were sent to the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard University. Due to Thompson having ownership of the Chichen Itza area, nothing was really said or noticed at the time. It wasn't until 1926, when information came to light of the importance of the objects found, that there was an issue. Thompson's biographer, Theodore Arthur Willard, published City of the Sacred Well, and in that book, he greatly exaggerated the value of the artifacts found. In comparison, the New York Times also had a story which downplayed the monetary value and focused on the archaeological significance. Two sides to the same story. However, Mexican officials read Willard's book, and as a result, became furious with the work and actions Thompson had done. The government seized the estate, including Chichen Itza, and filed suit against Thompson for 1.3 million pesos, charging that the artifacts had been removed and smuggled into the United States illegally. Thompson never returned to the Yucatan and passed away in 1935 in New Jersey, but the lawsuit continued to drag on after his death. It wasn't until 1944 that the Mexican Supreme Court ruled in favor of Thompson and his heirs, stating that there was no theft, no smuggling, no violation of Mexican law. The artifacts were taken fair and square. His heirs promptly sold Chichen Itza and the estate to a Yucatan tourism operator. I'm not entirely sure how many of the artifacts still remain at the Peabody Museum, as there have been moments in history where the Peabody Museum have returned artifacts. The 60s and 70s are some of these examples. Just not enough of them. The events revolving around Thompson still remain a painful scab to the Mayan culture to this day, communicated by the locals and our tour guides as well. The only memorial to Thompson at Chichen Itza can be found next to the washrooms if you want to take a look. What is that memorial? It's the bucket he used to dredge the sacred cenote. Now, unfortunately, it's because of the tour that I really didn't get a whole lot of stories like that one for most of the other buildings and temples in Chichen Itza, like the Temple of the Soldiers, the Hall of the Thousand Columns, the Venus Platform, the list can go on. And the reason is simply because of the distance in order to get to some of them from that central field. If we got to them, then we would be able to talk about them more, specifically like the Tomb of the High Priest and the Caracal. But depending on the different guides you might get, whether they're Mayan residents or archaeologists, your tour will be richer in different areas. But there are a couple of stories in areas that were covered, including, the obvious one. We'll get to it, trust me. First off, let's start with the ball court. The largest and best preserved ball court in ancient Mesoamerica, covering around 150 meters, the ball court has been covered in one way or another in numerous documentaries, so nothing I'm saying is really new. Presumably an interesting combination of basketball and soccer, the sport's most accurate name comes from the sounds that could be heard echoing throughout the city, various poks and toks, thus giving itself the name Pakatok. Two teams played with a roughly 4-pound solid rubber ball, which they had to get through an ornate stone ring 6 meters above the ground on either side of the court. But what happened if you won? Well, presumably the losing team, or the captain, was sacrificed to the gods. Insert how here because it was not actually said, so it might not have been decapitation like everybody else says. However, our tour guide gave another side to the story. The winning captain might have also been sacrificed due to his victory. As a result, the captain was sacrificed and received a direct route to heaven, compared to the other more arduous route compared to the trials of the Mayan underworld. Speaking of different perspectives, our tour guide gave us some insight into the class system of the Mayan people, specifically in the Chichen Itza area. In a generic sense, Chichen Itza divided itself up between the nobles and the commoners in terms of where they could live, and where commoners could not go. There was not much to say about commoners in detail, other than that they were restricted in what they could wear, eat, and go, and that they made sure that the nobles were settled before they could look after themselves. The noble class of the Maya was much smaller and filled priesthood or became government officials, court officers, town rulers, scribes, tribute collectors, military leaders, administrators. I think that covers them all. While they ate the same meat and vegetables as everyone else, no doubt they could afford more meat and special foods. For instance, they drank chocolate and an alcoholic beverage known as dulce. The life of a Maya noble was easier than for a Maya commoner, but if they were captured in a war, nobles were far more likely to be tortured and sacrificed to the gods. Commoners, if caught, were more likely to end up as slaves, although they too could be sacrificed by the enemy. The nobles' heritage and position was passed down to their young whenever they could, and according to Maya beliefs, nobles were intermediaries between the gods and men, with the king being the greatest intermediary. Nobles, therefore, had duties to both the gods and to man. There were photos that were shown around of Maya noble skulls, showing how important it was to be connected to the gods. So much so that at birth, a noble baby would have its cranium deformed and reshaped to look more similar to what they might have thought the gods looked like. Kind of look like anything else? Some people would think that the gods were aliens, and these aliens might have helped in the construction of Chichen Itza. It's always aliens, isn't it? But there were some places that called Chichen Itza and the ancient Mesoamerican civilization, quote, American Egypt. Which brings us to the centerpiece of Chichen Itza. What everyone sees, you can't ignore, and what you see thousands of pictures of on Google. Just Google Chichen Itza and it's probably the first thing you see. And the next couple hundred pictures as well. The Step Pyramid of Chichen Itza. It goes by a couple names. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the area, they named it El Castillo. But the pyramid is primarily known as the Temple of Kukulkan. The name Kukulkan refers to the Mayan feathered serpent god. And if feather serpent sounds familiar to you, then you might know the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. I don't know how much the Aztecs adopted the mythology of the Mayans, much like the Romans adopting the Greek mythology, but there you go. So let's start with what you can actually do when you're at Chichen Itza, looking at Kukulkan. Not much, unfortunately. You see, in 2006, there was a ban put in place by the Mexican authorities which prohibits people from climbing the pyramid. Before that, you were able to, and from other accounts, the steps of the pyramid are surprisingly higher than regular steps. Why are people prohibited from climbing? Well, a couple reasons, but they might make you hate human beings for a little bit. Up at the top of the pyramid, there is an inner sanctum, a sacrificial altar that has a red jaguar figure. It has jade eyes and teeth, something that is actually not available in the Yucatan, which means that it had to be imported, presumably from the Pacific Northwest, because that's where the bountiful amounts of jade are. However, The eyes and the teeth were stolen by visitors to the site who simply walked out with them. Another thing our guide mentioned was somebody actually going to the washroom inside of that altar. Great job, humanity! Really swell job! However, one of the worst reasons, which happened in 2006, was that a woman did unfortunately fall to her death from that pyramid, which was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So yes, unfortunately it has been roped off, but there is plenty of work and effort that has gone into the construction of Kukulkan. The astrological significance of the pyramid is astounding, similar to the architectural genius that went into the Great Pyramids in Egypt. For instance, the pyramid is designed to encompass the Mayan calendar. The four-sided pyramid has staircases on each face, and each face has 91 steps leading to the top. This adds up to 364 steps. Combine that with the additional step for the top temple and the altar, this totals to the 365 days of the solar year. There are 18 terraces on each side of the stairways, the stairway cutting it in half, so that's 9 on each side of each staircase, the 18 equating to the number of months in the Mayan religious calendar. Perpendicular to the terraces are the 52 vertical panels, and this represents the 52-year cycle of the solar and religious calendars. And finally, the pyramid was built in such a precise angle so that during the spring or autumn equinoxes, an optical illusion is created. As the sun sets, the northwestern corner of the terraces casts a shadow on the northern stairway, creating a diamond pattern representing a snake's body, which leads down to the ornate snake heads at the bottom of the staircase. This representing the serpent part of Kukulkan. The amount of people who actually come during these specific 2 days alone is incredible, just by looking at the pictures alone. However, the site does artificially create the effect every night. Just bring a flashlight so that you can navigate through the site, as there are no lights set up for easy navigation. Now, the serpent part of Kukulkan is represented on the pyramid, but what about the other part, the feathered part? Not only were the people of Chichen Itza so precise in building the pyramid, but also in building the altar up top. You see, if you clap your hands in the vicinity of the pyramid, you will hear a strange sound reverberate back. Bird sound.
Help me to impress her group. 1, 2.
Testing the sound's frequency, it is very similar to that of the Quetzal bird, one of the holy animals of the Maya, the feathered part of Kukulkan. It was also mentioned that in the ball court, the sound of a jaguar could be heard through clapping, but when we were in the ball court, it became too windy at the time for us to try. Wind just funneled through there. What is interesting to note is the lack of Quetzal birds in the Yucatan Peninsula. The Quetzal lives only in the Maya highland, where that culture originated from. So when the Maya moved to the lowlands and towards the Yucatan, they couldn't find the Quetzal there. It's much too hot and dry for it there. It could be possible that the Maya still wanted to have some sign of presence of the godly bird. For example, for use in ceremonies. A simple clap of the priest, and everyone hears the godly bird. Now, you may notice in pictures of the Kukulkan that only 2 sides of the pyramid are restored. And the reason why is still hazy to me. The reason is because when I was down there, I heard and overheard conflicting reports as to what happened during the restoration process. Restoration began during the 1920s, and the Mexican government, on hand at the site, wanted to make sure that the stones were as accurate as possible to the original stone, composition and everything. This resulted in a painstaking process to make sure everything was right. This is where the conflicting reports come in. One story states that because the process took so long, the restoration was to be suspended until more funds and manpower could come in. It was at this time that Edward Thompson, still at the site, took stones currently unused and used them to build onto the Hacienda Chichen, the Chichen estate he resided at. He just took the stones and brought them over to his house. The other story simply speaks of various moments of instability, including the World Wars and the Mexican Revolution. Despite what the real story is, it is quite surprising to see that the Kukulkan is still incomplete. But the reason for that might be to show what it originally looked like. That and money. I can only speculate, really. At least they did an important half for showing off the equinox effect. Finally, let's talk archaeology. Teams of archaeologists still operate to this day on the site. The more interesting tales with archaeology usually come from happy accidents than from intended ventures. A big discovery at Kukulkan actually occurred in the 1930s, when an excavation team found a staircase under the north side of the pyramid. By digging from the top, they found another pyramid buried below the current one. And inside that temple chamber was a Chakmul statue, and a throne in the shape of a jaguar, painted red and with spots made of inlaid jade. The Mexican government excavated a tunnel from the base of the north staircase up the earlier pyramid stairway to that hidden temple, and opened it to tourists at the time. However, in 2006, it was also closed to the public. The thing about the Kukulkan is that it is an example of superimposition. The current pyramid was constructed between 1050 and 1300 CE during the city's peak. However, the second pyramid within was made around 800 to 1000 CE. Mesoamerican culture sometimes built over top of pre-existing buildings, kind of like how there is about 9 different ancient cities of Troy built on top of each other. This led to archaeologists thinking that there must be an underground cenote right nearby the temple, and their excavations can still be easily seen today at one of the unrestored sides. They just have a whole lot of holes there. While excavating for this underground cenote, and presumably connected underground caverns beneath Kukulkan, the discovery of a third pyramid within the previous 2 pyramids was also made, dating back to between 550 to 800 CE. This inner pyramid is thought to be of pure Maya architectural style, before coming into contact with other civilizations. Since this discovery, our tour guide had some information about their progress in its excavation. Although I can't really guarantee its accuracy, using the same doorway that was used in previous excavations by the north staircase, archaeologists have reached the top chamber. What was outside the pyramid was an indiscernible chest of sorts, presumably pulled out of the earliest pyramid. What was inside? I can't say. At this point, I don't know if it has ever been opened. This seems to be the closest thing so far as to finding something out about the original settlers of the site. But excavations do continue to this day, so maybe some new information has been made out there that hasn't been published yet. So with that, I feel like that is a fine point to end revisiting Chichen Itza. Would I go back? Absolutely! There is plenty around the site that I unfortunately did not get the full experience for, mainly due to our time constraints and trip planning. Personally, the biggest thing I would love to get a closer look at is the Acoustics and the nunnery, which I did not get the courtesy of fully absorbing like other notable buildings. In addition, there's also the caves of Balancanche. Although outside the archaeological zone, I would wonder if exploring them is still possible. I will leave you with something our tour guides told us at the very end of the day, returning to the resort. If there is anything to take back with you from your experiences here, remember that Mexico is a wondrous place, with places that invite you to be mystified and smile. Remember your time here and the memories you have created. I want to thank you all for watching this video, and hope you enjoyed what you've seen and heard here. Take care, everyone.
The grannies are all judgmental. They all just don't approve.